find a better light.
Tom, you're. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think we're going to say the same thing.
Hey, Tom, you're in Moosehead.
I am. There's the lake.
Oh, it's beautiful.
A beautiful day here, actually.
How'd the boat survive the storm?
Well, it survived fine because I pulled it out. Put it back in today.
Smart man.
Yeah, you know, it wasn't as bad as they predicted. We might have had 25-mile-an-hour winds, but they were talking about maybe as high as 50. So
my sister has it. Go ahead. My sister has a beach house on Oak Island, which got hit pretty bad.
Yeah.
But...
Oh, well.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Cindy.
Whereabouts are you on Moosehead, Tom?
Harford Point.
Harvard?
Harford Point, unorganized territory. We're 5 miles from downtown Greenville.
Oh, okay.
So not far. On the west side of the lake, heading up towards Squaw Mountain. Or Moose Mountain. Are
you on the cold side of the lake?
The cold side of the lake. I didn't know there was a cold and a warm side. I've been here for 50 years.
I think the whole lake is cold, isn't it?
It's warm this summer.
Was it warm?
It cooled down some after that storm, but it's been very nice.
Yeah. It's been a pretty good summer overall, I'd have to say.
A lot of humidity. That's
right. Point. Yeah, that's the hard part. But and your garden must just be like our garden looks like a jungle. Your garden must be.
My garden looks like a jungle because since I've been spending a lot of time here the last 3 or 4 weeks, the weeds have just gone out of control.
Yeah. We've been here and the weeds have gone out of control.
But there's a lot of produce in it.
Yes. We get a ton of cucumbers if anyone wants one.
Yeah. Have you had the crows eating them?
No. Why? Your crows have been eating the cucumbers?
Crows have been after my cucumbers like mad.
Oh, I would give some cucumbers to the crows. If you want some, I'll donate some to the cause.
I'll remember that next time I'm in Orono.
Okay, it's a deal.
We can trade dahlias for cucumbers.
We've been putting our cucumbers out by the side of the road.
Yeah, I walk by there every morning and I haven't seen them when I'm in Orono.
They don't last very long.
Sophie, are we at 4 o'clock yet?
Yes, I have 4, Tom.
Are we expecting anybody else?
No. In fact, the 2 that aren't here, I was expecting not to be here.
So I see Cindy and Cheryl and myself, and is that it for council?
We have Megan and Lori here too.
Oh, I can't see them.
Hello.
Hi, now I see you. Thank you. So we'll call the August 6th meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee to order. And I guess you have just announced who is present, which was fine. And the first item on the agenda is FY21 review, revenue sharing, forecast, and municipal budget review.
That's me, I think.
It is.
During the budget, I have a little presentation if you'd like me to do that, or I can talk us through. I had the presentation because I thought there might be people who didn't know what we were talking about watching.
That's fine.
All right. Wait. Let me find it. Oh, it does not like me.
Ah,
I'm gonna try this again. Sorry, folks.
While you're dealing with technical difficulties, we are to check in on this safety measures. I think it looks like all of us have a title, except Lori seems to have her name, so I don't know if you want to change that.
so my screen just went funny. Is that something? Oh, I see. I got it.
So,
Right.
the safety measure, one of the things we learned was that putting your name out there is part of, that's how they could get all the addresses. They were actually looking at your name and Googling your name in our town. So it has been suggested that we don't do it.
That's
So
yeah. So Lori actually says her name right now. If you want to change it to town councilor.
I can't see her right now, Megan. Is she?
It just changed. I don't
Okay.
know if someone took care of it or she did.
All right. So on that note, are we all set for me to try to begin? All right.
Sure.
I wanted to just run through the recap on the revenue sharing program. The state of Maine allocates 3.75% of the revenue that it receives for certain revenue streams to the municipal revenue sharing program each year. That's revenue that the state derives from individual income taxes, corporate income taxes, franchise tax on financial institutions, a portion of the service provider tax, and sales and use taxes. So whatever they receive in those buckets of funds, they send along 3.75% of that to the town. So all of that 3.75% is allocated into the municipal revenue sharing program. Those funds are then divided into two streams of funding. Revenue sharing 1, which goes to everybody. All municipalities get revenue sharing 1. And revenue sharing 2 goes to service center communities and those communities that have demonstrated a high burden, whether it's tax rate, low value. Orono is a large receiver of revenue sharing 2 funds. So the money that we get is based on what's actually received, but we have the benefit of the State Revenue Forecasting Committee that meets at least once or twice a year and sometimes more frequently. And their job is to forecast what the state is going to get in revenue. And part of that includes what the state is going to pass along to the municipalities. So these are projections. The stability of our general economy impacts the level of confidence and the accuracy of those revenue forecasts. So the more stable the economy is, the more chance that those projections are going to come in, you're going to come in close to the projections. The revenue types that are allocated for municipal revenue sharing are particularly dependent on the economy and economic activity. If people, if the economy is slowed down, people aren't spending as much, people aren't getting as much income, those are all very sensitive revenue streams to the economy. And the other thing to consider is that the Revenue Forecasting Committee can issue multiple forecasts in a year. They are not bound by having to have everything in by a certain date. So those forecasts can change at any time. So when we think about planning for revenue sharing, last year the town received, the towns, and I'm sorry, all of the towns received 3% of these revenues, not 3.75%. Orono's FY20 forecast was a little over $1.5 million. So this year, we all knew that we were going to get a pretty sizable increase in the amount that would be distributed to municipalities. And when the original forecast came out in March, early March, they were forecasting a transfer of about $144 million into the revenue sharing program. And Orono's share of that was a little over $2 million forecast. Then along came COVID-19, and we had this sudden and severe economic slowdown. We were told to be very careful, that they anticipated a sharp drop in revenues. They had no idea to predict what that was going to be. And so you had a bunch of towns and town managers making their best estimates as to what that might look like. As we talked about during the budget process, I felt like it was important not to be overly pessimistic, but at the same time to not put us in a position where we would have to be making massive cuts in the middle of a fiscal year to respond to changes in revenue sharing. So for the budget, I had offered an estimate of $1,248,160. This was down about $750,000 from the March 2020 projection. It was a decrease of about $265,000 from our FY20 revenue sharing projection, which was what was in the budget for us. So that was 62.3% of the original revenue sharing projection. Am I making sense to people now? So last week, the new numbers, the Revenue Forecasting Committee issued an updated forecast. And that forecast reduced the allocation to the revenue sharing program by about almost $17 million. So we're down to an estimate of $127,000 that's going to be transferred into the revenue sharing program. Now for Orono, they are predicting or projecting forecast distribution of $1,774,893, which is about $526,000 more than what was projected in the town budget. So I'm going to continue on a little bit before we get to a lot of discussion, if that's all right.
Fine.
So I'm going to give you this slide now so that you understand what I think your options are. Then I'm going to go through what some of my thoughts are, and then I'm going to pop this slide back up so you can go back to what your options are. Does that make sense? Okay. So I think the town council, has 4 options for how it could respond to the new forecast. You could do absolutely nothing and just leave the budget the way it is. If we collected more revenue sharing than what we forecast in the budget, it would come in as an over collection of revenue and sweep to fund balance, and you could decide what you wanted to do with it next year after you actually have the money. The second option would be to revise revenue and expense budget. So essentially realize increased revenue, but also look at some of the cuts in the budget and see if there are things you want to do to increase expenditures. That, if you did option 2, kind of supposes that it would be equal chunks so that the mill rate would stay the same. Option 3 supposes that you would recognize some amount, some or all of the increase in revenue sharing, and simply decrease the mill rate. Option 4 would be some combination of option 2 and 3, meaning you maybe bring some of the expense stuff back, you realize some of the revenue, and you allow for some decrease in the mill rate. These options 1, 2, 3, 4 are the reason I've titled them is to make it easy for people to talk about. This is not a suggested priority list or my first choice, my second choice. This is simply options listed. So what I wanted to just go through real quick, some of the things I hope you will think about as you're making this decision. First, there is a significant lack of confidence in these forecast numbers. The state's economic future is truly an unknown. If you go on the state website, they have in big, huge red letters that this is a projection and likely not what we are going to get. We know on the public health side, we are being prepared for a virus surge in the fall that will require us to shut down to some degree. Might not happen. We could be right back to where we were last March and April. So there's really that idea of the stability in the economy is just not there right now. When I got our revenue figures, I reached out to a few managers that I have deep respect for and asked how they were approaching this. All of them expressed a significant lack of confidence in the numbers and caution for being very conservative as we walk through this. I think the underlying piece with how much people were willing to do had to do with how much they could lose. So there was one town I spoke with that had a very significant fund balance, and they essentially were poised to be able to eat a significant they don't think that they recognized enough of a shortfall in their budget. So they think that they're going to be running a deficit this year. So my first thought is significant lack of confidence in the forecast. The other thing I would want you to think about, just so you are thinking about kind of what our current budget reflects. So we have delayed capital expenses. So there are routine reserve allocations that we didn't make. There's the delayed infrastructure project that we had planned originally in the budget to put $400,000 aside for North Main Avenue, to do North Main Avenue, and we only have $170,000 for that. And then we had some equipment purchases that got delayed. The first two, I would say, would be items that if we allocated funds towards those and the money did not arrive as it was scheduled to, we would be in a position of not having spent anything. So it would be easy to recover from that. The equipment purchase is there because it's a delayed capital expense that I think we're going to have to look at next year. We have 1-year operating service cuts. The public transit, we're not going to have a choice with. It's going to cost us an additional $26,000 next year, plus any increases in the operations. That is the result of an overpayment this year because they found savings through CARES grant funding for public transit at the end of the year. We're gonna want to bring a municipal pool back online next year, and that's $32,000. We have a part-time children's services clerk position that is currently not funded, and we have that shared WPCF public works laborer position that is that represents 50% of that full-time position. Whoops, there we go. So the other thing that the current budget reflects was kind of a departure from some planned financial steps. So we were trying to follow through on a plan to decrease our dependence on the undesignated fund use to balance the annual budget. We were at $400,000 in FY19. In FY20, we went to $350,000. The plan this for FY21 had been to go to 300 or 250,000, depending on what the budget looked like. We are back up at 400,000 in the approved budget. We had planned on some incremental funding for fiscal year 22 Route 2 culvert project. So that's a bill for next year of $385,000. And we had thought about some incremental preparation for the FY22 fire department staffing increase, which is a total of $326,000. We ended up being able to show about $30,000 in the current budget towards that. So it's down at $297,000 that will be the jump next year. So those are the things I would think you'd want to think about. And I'm looking for some guidance because Mike is gonna be ready to commit property taxes in 2 weeks. And if we want to change the budget, we would want to do that, at least have a discussion about it on Monday night.
Oh. I suspect everybody saw the front page of the Bangor Daily News today, where the governor has requested department heads to find 10% reduction in expenditure in this year's budget. So there's another indication of revenue projections being very unstable.
Sophie, could I ask a question about option 1? If we make no changes, is there an opportunity to make changes when things are more clear?
So the only thing that makes a deadline to make any change right now, Cheryl, is the fact that we can only commit taxes once. So if you decided you wanted a tax decrease now and the money didn't come in, I can't send another round of tax bills out to get more. So we can always, if the thought was, we don't know if the revenue is really going to be there, why don't we check back in 3 or 4 months and see where we are? But the goal would be, if we were going to get revenue in excess of what we had projected, we would look at then prioritizing what we might want to do with that. As long as you didn't need more money, you could do whatever you wanted. So as long as you don't need more tax dollars, we can do whatever, whenever in the year that you would like.
Thank you. My second question is, if the forecasted revenue doesn't come in at what they say it's going to come in, will it come in less than what you've projected in our budget? Could it come in less than that?
So I think it is unlikely, unless we came to a complete shutdown in the economy, that we would see that kind of a decrease. But the answer to your question is, could it? Yeah, it absolutely could. The other piece that nobody's talking about very loudly, because we're petrified, is that we're talking about the economic drivers in the revenue sharing. But as the state is dealing with its budget constraints, we know that one of their favorite ways to make their budget balance is to raid revenue sharing. So while I hope that all of the work that we've done to convince people that it's not a good thing to do will hold, in the manager's world, we still kind of remind folks that that is still kind of out there, because the state does have the ability to change the law.
Sophie, I appreciate the information you've provided so far. I'm personally very reluctant to make any change in the budget at this time. I think Cheryl's question was a really good one, that if we leave things the way they are, the tax rate we've done an excellent job in municipality of not raising the municipal side of the taxes. I'd be in favor of leaving some things the way they are for now, personally. What others feel?
I agree. I would be extremely reluctant to add anything into this budget with how unstable this projection is. I don't trust it. I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen this fall. We don't know what the legislature is going to do or what. I mean, there's so many unknowns, and I think that we have a very carefully considered, thoughtful budget that folks can live with for now and understand why it is the way it is. So if projections, if the revenue sharing comes in higher than we're anticipating in this budget, I would love to talk about where we might use that, because we definitely have some spots that we need to put it, like reserves and culverts. Right. But I wouldn't make any changes, no.
Good. Thanks, Mike.
I agree. I don't feel that I want to try and hire someone and only to look at having potentially to lay them off in February or March. So if we were going to allocate the money anywhere, I would put it into reserves or infrastructure that we could delay if we needed to. So I can either stay where it is or put it in reserves. That's about where I am.
Any other comments?
I agree with Cindy.
Sophie, do you think you have the reaction needed?
I do. Would you like to, during the Finance Committee update, Tom, at council meeting on Monday, just speak to this, because we had said that the council was going to review this when the forecast came out, and if you could just speak to the committee's recommendation that we just hold steady for now.
Yep, I would be glad to. And again, that doesn't preclude us from later in the year, when things are a little clearer, of revisiting this issue.
Sophie, can I ask just another, just in general kind of question? Is the state statute still 5% for revenue sharing, or has that been amended?
So what happens is the statute still reads 5%, but then they go down below it and say, but for this year, we're going to do, it was 2% for a long time. I mean, the statutory language is like almost a page now, where they have amended it so many times. So we know that last year, when they passed the biennium, that gets fixed in the kind of the omnibus that comes along to make all the statutory changes to enact the governor's budget. So the statutory change at that point was to move from 2% to 3% in 2020 and 3% to 3.75% in 2021. Now the hope is that we'll go to 4% in 2022, but something we don't know. We can hope.
Yep.
So I have what I need.
Are we ready to move on to the next item? I think we are. So next item is fire department staffing options to cover long-term absence.
I'm gonna just ask Mitch, who is behind the town picture of the town, to pull the fire chief up as a panelist.
Should already be there.
I think I'm here.
Oh, good. All right. All right. So we had talked with the committee last month about our concern, because we have we have 2 people out on longish. One's on a very long-term absence, and the other one is on a moderately long-term absence. Both work-related injuries. And we are burning not only a lot of overtime costs, but we are demanding an awful lot of our people right now, when you consider that right now they work an average of 56 hours a week which is 48 and 72. So it can be an awful long week, and then you add another 24-hour shift in, and I think we're starting to see some of the impact of that. So when we met council, I heard 3 kind of requests was, can show me the money, and also wanted to talk a little bit about why we couldn't look at more flexible coverage within the schedule to potentially save money that way. So when we talk about additional staffing needs, I looked at a 3-year average of time used, just because there are spikes in certain months and it can throw things out of whack a little bit. So I wanted to not just go with 1 year. We used the 3 years that we have in the payroll software system. So currently we are averaging 325 hours. It's 119 hours of sick time and 206 hours of vacation time a month, which is 13 and a half shifts a month that somebody is not there and needs to be covered. So if we were looking at filling from September to next June, that would be 10 months that we would be filling. Our average overtime rate is 32.32. So the reason that we could say we're going to fill all of those shifts is because our floater is right now has been pulled off the float and has been assigned to cover an individual shift. So anytime somebody is away, we have to fill that with overtime with the current operations level. So our average overtime rate is $32.32 an hour. And if I do all the math, at the end of the year, our FY21 overtime budget for vacation and sick leave will be overspent by approximately $53,000. So costs about $105,000 to cover those absences. If we were to hire one of our firefighter paramedics early, so we're already scheduled to hire 4 in May. If we were to hire one early in September, we would already have $8,000 towards the $67,000 that would cost us, 67 and some change. So we would be looking at a total budget increase of $59,000, which we might be able to mitigate some of that with what's left in the overtime budget, but I'm not sure because that was based on having a floater, that budget estimate for overtime. So those are the costs associated. Is that what you were looking for, Tom? You made that.
Yes.
Okay. So, oh, go ahead.
Could you speak to that $8,000 a little bit more?
Yeah.
It's
so
already in the FY21 budget.
Yeah, so in the FY21 budget for the 4 positions that we were going to hire at the beginning of May, we put in wages and full benefits for them for May and June, which equated to about $8,000 a piece. So we have that in the budget right now. If we hired them early, we wouldn't need to hire another person to.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So in the other conversations, we've had conversations about per diem individuals. And I wanted to take just a couple of minutes. The chief came to see me, and this is one of the times when we can understand that we use the same words with different meanings sometimes, and I think per diem is one of them. So when I think about per diem, I'm thinking of our policy language that says an individual is either full-time, part-time, or per diem, meaning they work a day, we pay them for a day. It is almost like a reserve force. When we've used, not like a reserve force, sorry. When we've used per diems in the past, we've done it as almost like you're a temporary employee. We're going to bring you on. We brought 2 firefighters on in the past like that, where they worked for us for 3 or 4 months, and then we hired them full time. It is difficult to get people to change jobs for an uncertain job, and more departments are making it more difficult to work in other departments if you're already on a full-time department, if that makes.
Yep.
So the idea, the per diem is something that every once in a while we can pick somebody up if we have a known short-term vacancy. We have tried to do that. When I talked with Chief about advertising the per diem, that is tough because we're kind of picky on who we would bring in that role, given the amount of effort that you have to bring to train somebody. We're looking for people who would just slide in, which is how we brought the 2 that are currently full-time firefighters with us now. The other piece, which is something that the chief and I have talked about and actually talked a little bit with the union about, is the idea of the reserve force. And we've talked about it in the context of hazmat, but that would be having essentially a call fire force that when you need them, they would come. But they don't, when you marry a force like that with a professional fire department, they are not going to be trained to do everything the professional firefighters do. They become ground support when there's a building fire. They become kind of assistants on the scene. And the chief hasn't interrupted me yet, so I think I'm on track. The concern with call force firefighters, and you see it especially in small towns in Maine, is that it's really hard to get people to commit the level of dedication, training for essentially a part-time job. You only get paid when the tone goes off with a call force. So we really are thinking what's feasible at this point. It's either going to be to use our existing force or to hire somebody early. We happen to be in hot demand right now because the word has gotten out about our staffing, our shift change coming up, and I think we will be able to recruit well. And I think we've got a couple people who might be interested in coming on board early for us if we did that. So questions about the 2 options here in terms of money?
When you say a couple people are interested in coming on board, but you're thinking just 1, right, in September?
I'm just 1. This is just 1, but it's really nice to be in a position where people who already are paramedics and I'm not going to have to train or send to hazmat training are reaching out to us as opposed to us, begging for people to come.
Sophie, if this isn't a violation of personnel, are we still paying the 2 on workers' comp?
So we pay 1/3. Workers' comp will reimburse us 2/3. That has not hit. I have not seen that hit the budget yet, so that should be coming. But that's only of their wage. We're still paying all their benefits, and we still have to pay the overtime costs.
I mean, to me, the overspending of the overtime budget versus bringing someone on earlier, it's really a small amount that it makes sense to bring on another body and to keep morale up in the police department, fire department, and in the police department too.
It will.
I agree. I mean, the money obviously that's a pretty big difference, but also, I mean, it does concern me that folks might be getting worn thin. I mean, you know, there's a lot of professions you might be able to show up and just kind of drag your way through it when morale is low, but I don't think firefighting is one of them. So
my thought too, because I don't usually come and say I want to spend money and not have an idea how to cover it. My thought is that some of that we'll be able to cover with the workers' comp reimbursement, but the rest of it, if there is an overage at the end of the year, $25,000 in terms of, we could reallocate the OEDC debt. We pay the rest of the debt and there'll be some left in there, so we could reallocate those funds if you wanted to cover that way.
Well, we're on the hook for some increase one way or another. And if we're looking at, you know, the overspent budget versus increased budget, it's, unless I'm reading this wrong, it's a matter of $6,000. So why not do the thing for $6,000 if it's going to make people safer and maybe help with morale and not wear people too thin? I think that is a very justifiable trade-off.
And Sophie, do you have any sense of when the two staff will be back? When they'll be recouped enough to come back to their jobs?
So one of them I am not expecting back in this fiscal year. And the other I am not expecting back for another 4 to 6 weeks. Correct, Chief?
I'm coming. Hold on. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So if we have one come back in 4 to 6 weeks, that will help a little bit, right, with the staffing?
It will help a little, so the floater has already, for the long-term leave, has already been pulled into the shift rotation. So right now we are covering, like last month, I covered 26 shifts in overtime. Some of it was for vacation, but a lot of it was because I mean, 11 of those shifts were because I had somebody else out on workers' comp that I had to fill overtime for. So I had kind of taken that short-term person, Cheryl, and included him in the average shifts, just because we usually have a couple of short-term injuries like that every year, just given the nature of what the fire department does. Am I answering your question? Okay.
Yes.
So I've heard, are folks in favor of moving this forward? Yes, Cheryl?
I certainly am. It appears that we've lost Tom.
Tom.
Yeah.
Oh, here he comes.
There he is.
Does somebody just want to recap quickly for Tom?
Sorry about that.
Tom, we've been discussing that really we're looking at about a $6,000 difference between overspending the overtime budget and bringing on someone early. And we're thinking that for morale, it might be better to just bring someone on early. And then we talked about the floater position being now is moved into a weekly shift position. So we basically, even if we get one person back in 4 to 6 weeks, that still doesn't give us a floater position, as I understand it.
Yep. And have we talked at all about where the additional funds are going to come from, whether it's hiring a person early or just spending it in overtime?
So
She did.
Yeah. Some of those funds will come from reimbursement from workers' comp. Not all of them, clearly. But what is not there, if it looks like we're going to overspend the bottom line, we have, you have contingency of $10,000 that we could hit if you needed to at year end. If it was more than that, the final debt payment on the economic development general obligation bond for Godfrey Drive happens this December. There are significant funds remaining in that reserve that can be reallocated.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't we have unspent revenue sharing too?
Hopefully.
If revenue sharing came in to that degree, it would be something that I would suggest you allow the over expenditure to stay on the financial report on the expense side, because it tells a story of what happened this year. And when we try to cover that is when when we don't have revenues to offset, because you've got a good, well thought out story this year.
Yep. I agree. The hiring of an additional person makes more sense than relying strictly on overtime for the rest of the year.
From a process standpoint, if I'm not actually asking to adjust the budget right now, there technically isn't anything that goes in front of council. Are you guys comfortable with this direction that you've given me being enough for me to go work with the chief to bring somebody on?
I'm comfortable. I think we ought to find a way to inform other council members who aren't here, maybe just by part of the manager's report at a council meeting.
Okay.
Just to have it on the record. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or even a finance chair's
report
update on.
Yes.
On the meeting.
And I will commit to not hiring anybody before Monday.
Great.
Just in case people have major objection. So the chief and I actually did a bunch of other work that I just want to share with you, although your decision is made, just because I think it's interesting and should put some questions to bed. So we were asked to look at, kind of the hypothesis was, or the question was, is there a time of day, time of year, day of the week that we don't have to staff the same as we do the rest of the time? So we went in and pulled calls. The fire department calls are reported on a calendar year basis, not a fiscal year basis. So it truly is, these numbers are from January 1, 2017 to December 31, 2019, okay? And what it shows us is that we've got a pretty even pie pieces here for calls by the month. We go up a little bit in September and October, and you would expect that because our population increases significantly in September and October. But generally, pretty well distributed. Calls by day of the week. We have another nice wagon wheel. There truly is no rhyme or reason for what day of the week. I think if you look at the numbers, you'll see on Friday and Saturday, there might be a slight uptick in some parts of the year, but in general, it's pretty even. I just like the colors in the scatter plot here. This shows by the month and by the time of the day. And what you see is the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 is actually, you'll see it on a different chart, but these are the number of calls, and then the y-axis is the time of day. And as you would expect, there's less call for us between midnight and 7:30 in the morning. But even at less calls, those are still, 25 calls in 1 month or 30 calls in 1 month at midnight is pretty significant.
Mm.
So that's, and this shows calls by time of the day, that if you look, we don't drop below 100 in any year. This is based on the year. So I would not be comfortable downstaffing overnight, because I think there's still a significant call on that.
It's very useful to see this information, and I thank you for compiling it. I mean, you know, as I was thinking at the last meeting when we first talked about this, emergencies don't care about averages. So, I mean, we spent a good amount of time listening to our chief and folks in the know about why moving away from that.
She had an inkling her system might not act appropriately today. Yep. So I think the other thing that was kind of interesting is we looked at double ambulance calls. So those would be calls when we are out of the station already and we get another call for an ambulance. And last year alone, we ran 191 double ambulance calls. So that is really significant. So that is the end of my charts and graphs. And then,
Sophie, can I ask just a quick question before on the fire? How many of those, and I know this may or may not be charted, but are many of those false alarms? Like, are many of those calls that go out that there's not a fire, there's not an emergency?
So the
or are they pretty much all? Yeah.
So the 191 double ambulance calls, most ambulance calls are not false alarms. We might not transport, but there's usually a need on an ambulance call. The fire calls, I think Chief has separate way to document false alarms, and I don't have those numbers. I don't know if the chief is frozen too.
I don't have those handy. I'd have to pull them for you.
You don't have to do that. I was just curious if there were, you know, how many of those calls that you really didn't, you know, weren't really an emergency per se. You still have to go out on them.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So that's what I have for this. And then just the last picture I had was of the sidewalk today, in case anybody hadn't seen it.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
the sidewalk. Rob Yerxa, Rich Robichaud, and Scott Olet were out there painting in the middle of the road. They did a great job.
Looks good.
All right, I'm going to
Good
stop
job.
my share. There we go.
So are we ready to move on to the next item, which is addendum to assessing revaluation contract with Vision?
Yes, and I see my town assessor's chandelier. He is at home enjoying tax school, virtual tax school from home for 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah, 14 hours over the last 2 days of Zoom. So I'm kind of zoomed out. I was over sitting in the recliner listening patiently for the tone to come before the camera. So, yeah.
I don't know. He looks a little tan, Sophie.
Well, he and I had
There's no
vacation. Yeah, I think he had vacation the week before I had vacation.
Yes. Yeah.
So recently we were with the Finance and Operations Committee talking about our concerns around being able to get the reval complete on time. And we chatted with the committee about asking Vision, who had done the commercial reval, the commercial properties for us, if they would give us a price to come in and work with Mike to finish up the rest to make sure that we could get it done on time. So it took some digging, but we got a number out of them. And I think it would be important for Mike to just tell council kind of what the plan would be, what the timeline would be, and then what the added cost would be.
Okay, so I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to go right to the number because that's what everybody wants to know. There's approximately 1,100 parcels that need to be done, single family and two family residential. We received a quote for $49,500. If I'm given the okay, I am going to try to negotiate that number a little bit. 49.5 would be a worst case scenario. If I get a blessing to proceed, I am going to reach out to them and see if there's any wiggle room in that price. As far as time frame, again, there's 1,100 parcels approximately that need to be done. That includes both parcels that have not been seen, as well as parcels that supposedly had been seen and were done, but were discovered to be incomplete. They're looking at sending 1 to 3 listers here. Those will be the people out in the field, taking the pictures, doing the work. And they anticipate about 4 months to complete from the day we say go. Obviously, at this point, we're well within the time frame to have it done for April 1. I'm hoping, with my fingers crossed, you can't see them, but to get a blessing to go forward with this. This has been a significant burden on me and the assessing office here since I started. And as I've said before and at the last committee meeting, I really want to get this thing done. I know in these times it's a significant amount of money to ask for. And if it's any consolation, it's still approximately $60,000 to $70,000 below the other bid that we received when we put out the RFP. So, you know, there is additional cost, but you can also look at there's some savings. So,
What's the allocation we have in the budget for the reval now?
So we have $5,000 left in the reserve after we expend the balance of the bill for vision, because there's still one more bill coming, correct, Mike?
there should be, yes.
So there's 5,000 there. I think if we, in order to move forward, the only way I could see to fund that would be either to do a direct draw out of fund balance or to reallocate a reserve. Truly the only, I don't have a rabbit on this one.
We didn't budget anything for FY 20.
No, we just had a little bit in FY. I think we put 5,000 to help him with some professional services. Let me just look real quick. Oh, there we go. Nope, actually we put 10,000 in for total assistance. What are you gonna need, Mike, for other work, not just this? Because you don't want to short.
I would feel pretty comfortable, Sophie, if you wanted to allocate that amount toward this. I mean, what else is there? If it's done, if they finish it, it's done. I mean, there may be some, I mean, the only other thing I could anticipate, which wouldn't be in this fiscal year, would be if there's a multitude or even a few abatement issues that may rise up, but those will be addressed in the ensuing fiscal year. So I don't anticipate needing any additional professional services if Vision were contracted to complete the rest of the residential.
So that leaves, with the 5,000 that's remaining in the reserve and this 10,000, it would be 34,500. And if Mike could get us a reduction, that's always appreciated.
So, go ahead, Tom.
No, I think we have made a firm commitment to get this done by April 1st. And it's not just a burden that's hung over Mike. It's been the last two assessors prior to him being here. So we really need to get it wrapped up. And if this is the most reasonable way to do it, I think we have to go forward with it.
I was going to say that if my math is right, this is the reason why I'm not on the finance committee, but that's about $45 a parcel, right? If there's 1,100 parcels left, right? Yes. That's really, it's $45 a parcel.
That was
basically, I mean, rounded approximately.
Yep.
That doesn't sound too exorbitant to me, but.
I kind of agree with Tom. This project has been around for a very long time. And I feel like there's other things that can't move forward because we don't have the reval. So
right.
If we get the reval done, then we can move some other things forward. I don't know if it's worth any time, but is there any way to go back to the ones that weren't complete? Is that a company that we could talk to about a reduction because they didn't complete the work?
Our last assessor.
Oh.
So it was in-house.
Okay.
Correct, Mike?
Yes, the work that was incomplete was the contracted employees. There were 2 or 3 people, and a couple of them just weren't thorough with their information gathering. That's it. I also anticipate that, again, the 1,100 that's a worst case scenario. I mean, I have tax commitment here in a couple weeks. My field work pertaining to this year's pickups will be done. So I'm not going to be in the office twiddling my thumbs. I'm going to get back out there and do what I can to reduce that number as best I can. And again, as Cheryl had said, $45 a parcel was the rate built into the contract. So, for every 100 that I can do, that's reducing that cost significantly as well. And I think that it's feasible that I certainly can get out there and make that number smaller.
Well, that sounds more reasonable to me. I think in retrospect, years ago when we talked about revaluation, we probably were not realistic in thinking that it could be done as much in-house as we thought it could be done.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
No, I'm all set.
My other question was, what's the timeline? Like, is when they start, and is it just dependent on when they can, like when they can finish? I mean, what are they projecting they can finish this in?
The timeline provided was at most 4 months from when we give them the okay. Obviously, as we roll into the fall and winter, some of that is weather dependent, but well within the April 1st timeline. That's going to be our drop dead date. We still have many months until then, but they had said 4 months to finish.
Yep.
Mike, so if we get all the residential done, then we can roll out the new numbers, or do we have to wait for commercial to get done too?
Commercial is done. Vision has already had representatives here in town measuring and listing every commercial and more than 2-family property. So that information has been gathered. It's been keyed. It's in the system. They just haven't cut it loose to me yet. So this will be an all or nothing. When it goes, we're going to do everything. So we'll have commercial and residential, all new values across the board for every parcel in town.
Good.
Okay.
The piece that I'm happy about is by doing it this way, we'll be able to get people notice of their value change and offer them the opportunity to come in and meet with Mike to talk about it before it just shows up in a tax bill to them, which will allow us to hopefully catch problems before they are committed problems.
I think we need to move ahead. Any further comments on this item? All right.
So are you comfortable with the order giving us the authorization to sign a contract addendum? And at this point, if I can just say we'll pay for it out of the assessing reserve with the understanding if we need to, we'll have to reallocate. So I can pay for it across his department in the assessing reserve. When I deplete the funds in the assessing reserve, we'll know how much we have to backfill. Is that all right to get it to zero? Okay.
Yep. Okay, we're ready to move on. Proposed municipal budget adjustments, FY20, FY21.
I only have one set of budget adjustments, and it's for FY21, and I'd like to do it on Monday night if possible. I have $9,750 that were in all of the line item documents that you received as part of the budget, but did not get tied in with subtotals. It was a Tom Perry issue. And so the $3,950 that was part of the emergency management sub-budget in the fire department budget did not get pulled through to the final number that was approved at the council meeting. And there was $5,000 in our flex for our flex account management, the fees associated with the flex account administrator, and $750, if I've done my math right, for group life premiums. Those group life premiums are for people who retired before we changed the program to not cover retiree premiums anymore. So these are $750 a year that we're obligated to expend, but when they no longer want life insurance, we will not have to pay for it anymore. So I would like to make an adjustment, and my two places I'd like to adjust, I think we have a couple of $1,000s worth of savings in the library budget when everything shook out with the new hire. When the new hire is starting was a little bit later than we had anticipated. We had plenty of money in there. So I'd like to take a couple of $1,000 from the library payroll lines and the rest reduce our overlay number to balance the budget. So it's the same number that we voted at, the same number that we showed on the budget that we showed people with that.
Yep.
That works for you.
Any questions about that from council members? Seems reasonable.
No, sounds good to me.
And then given COVID-19, I like to make budget adjustments in the previous year's budget to reflect good stewardship of money. But with COVID-19, I really need the over expenditures to show because they are for a purpose. And so my plan is to just leave the budget the way it is. It will mean that we'll have a few more lines during the audit process of over expenditures, but ultimately at the end of the day, we did not have a deficit budget. We had revenue to cover it.
Good.
So that was my plan.
And won't the audit take into account the COVID-19? Will there be something written in the audit probably?
Yeah, so I have to do the management discussion analysis, which are the first 8 to 10, 12 pages of the audit. And in that, that's where I will have to speak to what was remarkable about this year. So this year we'll talk about the pandemic hitting, and next year we'll have to talk about why revenue sharing numbers were so huge and we over collected, and which will be a wonderful thing to have to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Speaking of the audit, we've got just about a month, and Casey will not be here, but be doing the audit. It sounds like it is another virtual experience, and so it went very smoothly for the field work. So
Great.
So that's all I have.
And we're going to not do July financials tonight or this afternoon. So we'll move on to a brief town manager's update.
I've got a couple of things. I already showed you the picture of the crosswalk.
Yep.
And I just want to give you a heads up that I fielded an email that came in as a, how does a citizen do something like this? You know, how does a project like this get done? I asked Nancy to take the call so I could prepare for this. And it ended up being more of a want chapter and verse as to how council would make a decision that would be okay. And I have directed Nancy to not give a laundry list of every meeting when this was discussed, but rather to just say was discussed several times, April, May, and June, and July, and just leave it at that. But my standard spiel to people is if community members want certain things in the community, they need to make proposals and bring them to council, and council will either decide that they fit with the vision and values of the town, and they want to support them, or it doesn't, and they will elect not to, and it's their right.
Yep.
So that's kind of where we are with that. Signage. We're having some issues with signs. So if you look at the town sign ordinance, it is not valid. It was rendered invalid by a Supreme Court decision a couple years ago. And so we fall back to following state law when it comes to managing signs in the right of way. So the state law says that signs can be out. Number one, that we have to look at signs without paying attention to the message. So it doesn't matter if it's my kid graduated from high school, or Black Lives Matter, or a political sign. It truly does not matter what it says. But you can't have two signs with the same message within 30 feet of each other. The signs can only be out for 6 weeks between January 1 to June 30, or July 1 to December 31st. It used to just be 12 weeks, now they've divided the year. And when a sign goes out, the name, their contact information, and the date it was posted has to be written on the sign. So when COVID-19 hit and we had an abundance of graduation signs, whether it be from kindergarten or middle school or high school or college, we elected to not run around and deal with signs. We really did. We were like, that doesn't seem like a message we want to give. And nobody complained about them. So then now we have people who want to put a variety of social messages out on their lawn. And again, don't particularly want to get into that. But we know political season is coming up, and we get lots of complaints about political signs because one candidate looks at another candidate and the complaints just start rolling. I can't enforce complaints against political signage and not deal with all the signs because I'm not supposed to be reading the content of the sign. So my thought was that we would do a bit of a media blitz to people about the rules for putting signs out. And then when we start getting complaints, we're gonna start enforcing. It kind of has to be enforced across the board at that point. Does that, I don't want to be mean, but at the same time, I don't want to end up in court over signs.
Is what you're saying that in general, what's causing the issue now, or the issue that needs to be addressed now, is folks who want to put a social message related sign that is just across the sidewalk in front of their property, and we need them to move it onto their actual properties? Okay, I think that's
so it's all, if it's on personal property, it doesn't matter if each neighbor has a sign.
As long as it is not in the right of way, my understanding is you could put 20 signs that all said the exact same thing outside the right of way on your property. You can't put it on publicly owned property or right of way without following these rules. And so there was we had at one point the law said they had to be identical signs. So like it couldn't be, vote for peanut butter and jelly every 10 feet. And so somebody got smart, which is kind of, I guess, what you want in your elected officials. And they had one vote for peanut butter and jelly, and the next one was, isn't peanut butter and jelly great? And then I prefer my peanut butter and jelly on wheat bread. And so they came back and they said, now it's not about the sign being identical. It is about the sign, if the message is the same. So essentially, if you're going to put a message in the town right away, it can't be the same message within 30 feet of each other. Go ahead.
My only question is, what is the responsibility?
We're losing you. Oh, there
Hello?
you are.
Okay.
There you are.
Is it complaint driven, or are we responsible for driving around town and looking at every single person's lawn?
So if I get complaints, we're going to go investigate that complaint. If it's in the case of political, during an election, I have to go out and kind of be a little bit proactive because it's usually one candidate or candidate's team that is calling about another one. So I can't go just do complaint driven because that doesn't work. But if my intent is to once again not get out and look at everybody's lawn, but if we go somewhere and there are 57 message signs, one right after the other in the public way, we're probably going to have to stop and talk to somebody about that. And I know this community enough to know that people want to do the right thing. Yep. And they don't want a visit from code enforcement. They would much rather us get the message out how to do it correctly. And I don't think we want to say we don't want messages, because that's not what this is about. It's about here's how you do it correctly.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sophie, can I ask a question too? So I'll just say that we have a sign, hate doesn't live here, right, on our yards. Well, it's kind of like on our driveway, but the town, I think, mows it. like it's responsible. It's still our property, but the town mows it. So that sign needs to be moved.
So, well, no.
Is that a public?
That sign can be up there for 6 weeks.
Okay.
As long as you put your name, your contact information, and the date you put it out.
Okay. All right. So can we start 6 weeks like now?
I will tell you.
Even though it's been out for.
I will tell you at this point, we're going to work to get people to date it. And then if there are major violations, if there are trouble, then we'll deal with it. The other thing I just want to make sure is I would much rather have people just agree to take their signs down before snow falls, as opposed to fight about how many weeks it's been, quite honestly. I mean, we don't have enough time in code to be the sign police. Want to let you know that the town, for the second time in the 9 years I've been here, the town has pending appeals before the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we have a property owner out at Pushaw Lake who their two neighbors, one on either side, have filed appeals of 2 permits that were issued. Roger Huber is representing the appeals board. Normally, Bill DeVoe, who is an attorney, is the chair of that board. In this particular case, his firm represents one of the parties involved in this, so he is going to step aside, and Roger has agreed to step in and help. I have reached out to Bernstein Scher for some quick advice on the town's position and what the town should be doing in this circumstance, because this is the second time in my entire 20-something year career that I've had an appeal before the Board of Appeals. So that will be interesting. So those hearings are public. Talking with Roger, so Nancy manages that because it's an appeal of a code enforcement decision. So we take it out of the code enforcement community development office, and Nancy Ward is the one that kind of is the coordinator. Roger and I talked, because this appeals board does not routinely meet, we are going to have them do a training, an hour and a half long, on the 12th, and then on the 20th they'll actually hold the hearings, where we will not send any information to them other than hold the date for the actual appeals until after their training, so that there can be no question about, we don't want somebody to read about this wonderful case and then ask questions in training, because then it's not a fair hearing. So that's kind of where we are there. You will see advertisements going out for 2 vacant positions. Rob lost another laborer. So we are holding, we had held to see if we could get one of the laborers to get CDL licensure to be able to move up to an equipment operator. The state is just not cooperating with that. He's done all of his work. He's sent in for his license, his permit, but time is getting short. And so our thought at this point is to run the hire process, encourage everybody who internally, if we have internal candidates to apply, see what we have. But so that position is to fill a funded public works position. There is still the equipment operator position that we left vacant.
Mm-hmm.
How did we do that? The shared laborer position is vacant, and we're filling the equipment operator position. The other one is a WPCF. We had an operator who has given notice. And so we are going to put an ad out there. going to be kind of picky on the skill set that we bring on board for that position. But those ads will be out. And that is pretty much all I have today.
That's a lot. Okay, we all set for our meeting?
Yeah, so on Monday night, Cindy has asked me to have the fire chief talk a little bit about the university's plan to return and the town's role in that decision making. We've also had a couple people who are would very much like council to consider mandating mask wearing in public or face coverings in public. I want to talk just a little bit about that with council. The town of Rockland did a resolution to urge council, or the council urged people to wear masks in public. I don't know, Cindy, did you want to speak to that?
I mean, I think we can talk about it on Monday, but I think we came back from legal pretty much saying that we couldn't do much more than a resolution, but that perhaps a resolution in this particular situation would make sense to urge university students and others, residents, to wear masks more often than not outside, I guess.
And then the last piece, we had an email went to everybody about the streetlight. How do you want to respond? Because there hasn't been any response to that person. Are you kicking that back to me, or do you?
I can't find the basketball. I can't.
I personally thought that it was to kind of kick it back to you with a staff response.
The staff response was really good. Rob did a good job, and it has been months. I mean, I heard this a couple months ago, so I know that it's been they've tried to diplomatically, help the situation, and I liked that the light, just get a shade or a curtain or whatever. If it's I know some residents have done that already, so.
It was interesting when somebody asked about a shade or a curtain. I'm like, well, they're 413 feet from the light. I don't think it's really gonna impact their curtain. But so there's that one. I think that's the only outstanding one we have at this point. Cindy, are you going to give an update at the council meeting about your interactions with David, or are we?
Yes, I'm going to have to push him a little bit. I haven't heard anything this week, but I will give an update on all of that on Monday.
Okay, that sounds good.
Is it 4 o'clock meeting on Monday?
Yeah, that was the plan.
Okay.
So I guess for the light issue, I was really impressed. During the time I've been on the council, I was really impressed with the town going after the funds to be able to do the transfer of the lights to make sure and evaluate all the lights to find out which ones were owned by whom, so that we could go through the process of taking control of all the lights and then switching the lights and making sure that they didn't make light pollution by going up. So I know that the town just spent a lot of time managing the whole transition to these better lights. And during that time, there was never any discussion about how they were going to be when they went down, nor was there a discussion about how we might have different wattage for a very public zone versus a neighborhood. And so I think that's what this letter gets to, is that in this neighborhood, that there's concern about how bright the lights are, and that there's the same, I don't know if the word is wattage, there's the same strength of light, whether you're on Main Street or you're on a small side street. And so that seemed to me that the response came back was, well, we can't do something specific for yours because it was like the slippery slope response, which is that, you know, this could be a really huge expense for the town to go over every light and ask every person how they feel about the light. And I guess I was wondering if there was something in between that, because I had a light outside my house and it was always flickering on and off. It was like a B-movie, horror movie. Like I'd come down the street on my bicycle and sometimes be on, sometimes be off, sometimes right when I went under it, it would flicker, and it was a little creepy. It finally went out, and I was glad. I never reported the town that it went out, and because I was glad that it was just gone. And I think that people, because we haven't had the kind of fabulous lighting system up until now, people just weren't, there was not a big focus from the town on the lights. And then I'm so applauding the town for making the focus on the lights. But now they're kind of set from that, with the way Rob's letter looked like it was a set thing and we were not going to work with individual homeowners. And I guess I'm wondering what percent of the lights are in neighborhoods versus in downtowns. And is there some way that we could find a way to be a little bit more flexible with the people who are having trouble with these lights? Because our goal is to do the best for our town. And I thought that the whole process getting here was the best for our town. So to read a letter to find out that people are disappointed after we did all this work, I'm wondering if there's a way we can, maybe not right away, but say this is a goal we have, which is to be a little more flexible for the people who are finding this to be a challenge.
I think when we're speaking about this, I mean, we did talk about, there are different wattage, I don't know if wattage is the right word either, but there are different strengths. And I believe that the one in that particular neighborhood is the lowest available. So we did talk about it during the process of discussing these lights as they went in. There are different options, different positionings and different brightness. And I think that was a big part of the discussion. So I'm disappointed that people might be disappointed, but that is the lowest brightness available is my understanding. Right, Sophie?
Well, and it also sounded from Sophie's email that the town brought in experts and worked to see what could be done and still keep things safe for everyone. And so
So there are standard wattages, and we use standard wattages. There are 3 different types of fixtures that we use in town. Well, we have heard, when it initially went in, we heard rave reviews from some and some people that weren't thrilled. Anytime we get a complaint, we go out and we investigate it and we look and see what we can do. My esteemed Public Works Director just texted me to make sure that I was aware that the light on Hamlin Street is not the same as a light on Main Street, that they are different wattages. So we're already looking at what's safe. And ultimately, when the concern is that somebody wants to live in the medium density residential zone, which has more dense population, and be able to look at the stars without any interference from lights, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that and have sidewalks that are safe to walk on. And when you have all these competing ideals, because one of the things that came up as part of our pedestrian safety conversations has been the fact that we needed to address lighting concerns. And we've spent a ton of money that we are still paying off for this. So if council wants to go spend $300 a light fixture plus more to do variable, you know, you're taking a light fixture that has 10 years of life in it and you want to replace that now, just be prepared to do it for anybody who wants. And I don't know that I have enough staff resource to be able to facilitate that program. So if that's something that council wants to do, council would really have to look at bringing somebody in that could manage that for us. And I have no idea what the bill would be, but if that's something council wants to do, I would be happy to try to get a quote.
That is not something this council member wants to do.
I would prefer to stick on our walkability path, and that if when it's 3 o'clock in the winter time and it's dark out, I'd like to see a sidewalk lighted up.
I agree.
I will take some variation of what I sent to council and send it back to Maisie as the response, so she knows that her concern has been discussed.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Sounds good. So we will meet again on Monday at 4 o'clock, unless you have any further updates. All right.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.